Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan. Today I'm talking with Justin Derry, the DP of the film Bruiser, as well as the short film called Bruiser. It was just at TIFF, and it's a fantastically shot film. I don't want to say beautiful message, but great story. You'll watch the movie, you'll know why I'm not saying beautiful. Powerful message, let's say. This one's got all the greats. We talk about getting started, especially in the kind of like those of us who are like skateboarders and stuff growing up. A lot of skateboard DPs recently. Techniques, management on set, everything. It's another amazing frame and reference. Who would have thunk it? So, as always, I'm going to shut up before I go on too long, so you can get to enjoying my conversation with Justin Derry. Were you always a visual person? Is like film what got you into cinematography, or did you kind of go down a different path at first and then switch over, find cinematography later?
Yeah. I definitely found it. But I will say, as cliche as it might be, like I grew up watching movies every weekend with my family and stuff, and movies were always a big part of my childhood. But then, and all like my brother's an artist, and my dad, though he won't admit it, can draw really well. And so I used to draw and like scribble around a lot. And I kind of like for a while thought I wanted to be an architect.
So many DPs become architects.
Yeah, it's funny.
Architects.
I don't think it really would have made sense for me now, like thinking back on it, because there is a lot. I'm not even that like versed in architecture. I don't know that much about it, but also like there's a lot more like procedure to architecture, and like it's a lot of like red tape that I just don't know that. Not that filmmaking isn't that, but like it's different, so I don't know if I would have actually enjoyed it as much as I thought I would. But then, yeah. And then I grew up skateboarding, which is also like a big DP thing. I feel like, and now at least my generation of DP, right?
Totally.
And I just would like travel around with friends shooting skate videos and editing. And, if I thought I wanted to be an editor at that point, cause I was like, man, I just was like, so, excited about technology and about, just what you could do with the computer. And like, I was learning After Effects and editing software and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I can do a lot with this. And yeah, it just seemed like that could be a good path. But I also, at the time, this was in high school, I like didn't really know filmmaking was like a career path. Like I didn't know much about it. And a friend of mine who I used to film with when we were skating was like, I think I'm going to go. He was like, I grew up with this kid. We've known each other forever. And he's like, I think I'm going to go to film school. I was like, wait, that's a thing that we can do? Because I was like, I don't know. I was like looking at graphic design and like, I was like, I don't know what I should do. And he's like, I think I want to major in film. I was like, man, that sounds great. So yeah, we applied to similar schools, and going to the same school up in Vermont, Champlain College. And yeah, I sort of learned there, like I think it was either my first or it was probably like second. It was probably second part of the first year, like freshman year. I took a cinematography class, and I was just like, man, this is what I want to do. At the moment I started shooting with a camera and like thinking about how composition and lighting can influence the way people feel about images. Cause like before that, it was always more documentary. Like I was just shooting things that existed. Right. So when I realized that you could actually craft images and, heighten reality and influence reality to tell a story, I was like, man, this is the way. And I was double majoring in graphic design, and I dropped graphic design immediately. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And yeah, from there, it just continued in that direction. When I first I was in Vermont, so I was like, man, I probably should move to New York, or LA. And so my third year, I transferred schools to Brooklyn College and moved to New York. Um, and yeah, I was like, how does somebody get into this? Right. Like it seemed
Right.
like such a far fetched goal to me at the time. Like I didn't know anyone in the industry. I didn't really have a way in. And I was like, I'll be really happy if I can get onto a small movie in the lighting department and just work in lighting. And I was like, I don't know if that's even a realistic possibility, but I'm going to shoot for that. So kind of immediately when I moved to New York, I did like all of the Craigslist and Mandy and all of that stuff. But I ended up just getting like referrals and recommendations from people. And yeah, I started working as, electrician in a grip pretty early. And yeah, it actually to the point where I ended up leaving school because I was like, I'm just working a lot and I don't have the time for both and the bandwidth for both. And I'm learning so much on film sets. And like, I don't know if I'd necessarily promote that idea to other people because like film school is definitely useful. Like I had a good time there and I learned a lot. But yeah, it was almost like I was being prevented from learning on set. So I was like, I'm just going to work and I'm going to start doing it.
Having interviewed 80 people now, I can say that's probably the ideal, is leaving film school early because you're working.
Right.
Because most people, if they go to film school, and I agree, I think film school is actually like useful for a multitude of reasons, not one of which being just giving your brain time to get out of high school mode,
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, totally.
Yeah, a lot of people leave film school and think that it's, like, and now I'm going to become a lawyer, or whatever a career path that a traditional job would have, whereas film is not that way. You want to be on set making those networks,
Right.
I did want to ask, when you were talking about learning AE and stuff, After Effects, were you a lightsaber guy or a bullet hits guy and muzzle flashes?
It's just funny because I did one of those, and it's like probably a video that like on my personal YouTube that has the most views. I did like a thing where I turned my face into a monster or whatever that like, I think like the Film Riot guys put
Probably Video Copilot back then.
Yeah, Video Copilot. That's what it was. I think it was that. And man, it was, yeah, it's funny. It's still up on I don't really use my YouTube channel. So it's still up there. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember any of those skills, to be honest. And I took an After Effects class in college where we like actually learned, the program a lot deeper. But yeah, no, if I opened it, I'd be lost if I opened it now.
Yeah, I still use it for like 3D titling, and that's about it. It's about as much as, and compositing to a degree. But yeah, there was back in the day, there was always like, it was basically two reasons to open After Effects: was making lightsabers or making muzzle flashes, and then everything else was never composited correctly, all looking like shit. I wanted to ask, because you said you were coming up in the lighting department, and this is kind of quickly jumping into things you learned, but like, I'm sure when you started there, you learned some good habits and some bad habits. And I was wondering if you can remember maybe some of those things that you're still doing today, or like skills that you learned there, and maybe some things you learned to leave by the wayside.
Sure. 1 second. Sorry. I'm like gonna cough.
Oh yeah, go for it. Actually, the noise reduction was perfect. I didn't hear a fucking inch of that.
Oh, I muted it because I was.
Oh, okay,
I was
okay.
aware.
I was like, wow, Zoom did a great job.
That's impressive. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I learned so much. What I left by the wayside, I'm not as sure about. But my first year, I was so excited and hungry to work as much as I could, and like I just loved being on movie sets. And so my first year, I think I worked on like 9 or 10 feature films in the grip and electric department. So I kind of, that was like a huge crash course, and they were all like, you know, ultra low budget, like sub $500,000 indies. And, you know, I was making like $100 a day or something. Maybe less. I don't know. So I did make 75 a day on one movie, I remember. But you know, I was just excited to be on set, so it didn't really matter. And I do think the fastest way to learn in this industry is just to do it. So for me, like, I just want to work, you know, and I learned so much on each film. And by like the end of that year, I started working as a gaffer. I sort of like worked my way up, in very fast within a year to 2 years. And yeah, and like started gaffing small movies, and then eventually worked as a gaffer on some movies that were still small, but like with filmmakers I was really excited to work with. And yeah, so I started getting like more selective. And right when I felt like I was getting offers for movies with like really exciting directors, I was kind of chose to like stop taking those so that I could start transitioning into shooting. But yeah, I turned down, I mean, I didn't even do the interview, but I remember I was asked to talk to Joe Anderson about, oh my gosh, Christine. Is that what that movie's called? The Antonio Campos movie, whichever. I really like those guys. So, and the work they do. So I was like so excited. I was like, man, do I really turn this down? But I was also like at a stage where I thought, if I'm going to shoot, I need to just do it and start shooting. And I was shooting shorts and stuff on the side. But to answer your question about, I mean, what I took from it, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I came up with this gaffer, Danny April, who gaffed like Good Time and a couple other films.
The most stressfulest film I've ever seen.
Yeah. And he kind of like, we used to joke around that if you work under Danny, you're kind of in the school of Danny April, because he likes to like kind of, he's not working as a gaffer anymore, but at the time he liked to really bring people up. I don't think he's working as a gaffer anymore. And yeah, he would like take people who were just hungry but didn't really know what they're doing and teach us like how to work efficiently and work smart. And yeah, still to this day, like it's really important to me. Like I'm like semi like OCD about how stands are set up and things. Like I just like everything to be like efficient, you know. And Danny would always say like every moment we waste setting up a light or setting up a stand because we didn't do it properly is taking time away from the movie. And like we all cared so much about the movies we were making that I very much took that to heart. So yeah, that was definitely something I learned a lot about. And then like the other thing was just to be bold and make creative choices and take leaps of faith and take those risks. From a lighting perspective, like try things that isn't obvious, right? Because you can easily fall into these easy ways of working. I don't want to call it a trap, but like things become comfortable if you have a couple lighting techniques that you really know are going to work every time. And when you're on a tight schedule, I think those are good to fall back on, but they shouldn't be your first, like the way your brain goes the first time, every time, right? You should kind of try to think outside of the box and think for what's going to work best for the scene or for the film or whatever you're doing. So I always try to push that as much as I can. And I think it's important to just try new things, like as much as you can. And like, it's hard to do that because like at some point you've done enough that you're like, this is just a bigger version of something I've done before or whatever. But like, but yeah, I think it's good to try to challenge yourself as much as you can.
Yeah. So all that being said, is there what is your fallback maybe like lighting setup that will work every time on a interview or whatever?
I don't know. It's a good question. I fall back probably on this too much. I love color contrast. So like
Oh,
for
we'll get into
daylight
that with the
scenes.
Bruiser.
Yeah, so I like love color and I love color contrast. So for a lot of daylight scenes, I often mix um, tungsten or very warmed up HMIs as hard light with a soft bounce or a softer that's cold. And yeah, I fall back a little bit on that too much. I think this next film I'm doing is it's a winter movie, so I think I'm gonna primarily try to keep the daylight very cool and cold. But kind of also because I'm like, I do this too much. I know it. I know I like it. I know it looks good, but it's not appropriate for everything. And I don't know, something about color for me, like if something is like doesn't have color and is dead, I don't feel very excited about it. So on set, I feel like that can be a little bit of like a fault because I love black and white images and I like monochromatic images when I'm watching a movie, but I almost never light that way. So I'm
Right.
like trying to think about that more and trying to push myself to break that occasionally, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Man, now my brain's going in two different directions, but I'll stay here for a second. You know, because I color contrast is actually something that I've struggled with a little bit in terms of, I guess kind of what you were saying was when is it appropriate?
Right.
So I guess that's the question. When would it not be appropriate to like do a nice like warm key, cool fill kind of, because it is a little more stylized.
Sure. Yeah. I think I don't think it's that appropriate when you're going for something that's very naturalistic. Like there are always balances in color, right? Like daylight's never just 5600 or whatever. Like even now I'm getting bounce off of the wood next to me. But if you look at like the video screen, like if you look at my camera here, like my image isn't warm and cool. Like there's a little bit, but it's very subtle versus like a lot of times in movies will heighten that and make it a really significant difference between one to the other. So I don't know. I think like I did a film in Atlantic City a few years ago, and that was wanted to feel very naturalistic, and I almost didn't even light a lot of it. We had like light mats and some small units that we would use, but we didn't light it. We didn't overly light it. I'll say that, and we tried not to go stylistic at all. And in some ways, I'm like, that's like a very exciting look to me as well. You know, it's just a different feel, and it feels a little bit more. Yeah, it just feels very natural and very believable, and like you get embedded in that, just as you get embedded in like something that's heightened or stylized. You know, so I appreciate both. I think a lot of cinematographers often talk about like they're on either side of the fence, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but I always hear people really fight for like, no, movies should not be reality. They should be stylistic and they should make choices and do things outside of reality. And then there are other DPs that are like hyper real, right? And really want to see like, almost want it to feel like a documentary. And I think both are valid. Like I want to be able to do both. And I probably lean more on the stylized side consistently, but I try to do both. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you know, this is kind of a longer thought, but I'll try to truncate it. Like stylized images are more cinematic, so to speak, because documentary is not, you know, on the spectrum, you've got cinema on one side and documentary on the other, and documentary is inherently not stylized in general. Not, there's plenty of very stylistic documentaries. Going back a little bit, something that we were kind of dancing around was you were saying that like, oh, you kind of got on set and just started working. And I think that's a question that a lot of people have is like, how does one make that first step? Because obviously nowadays you would go like, Mandy, I have not gotten a lot of jobs on. I'll be honest.
Right.
But you know, I've gotten, I'll cut that out.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, don't worry about it. But I have gotten a lot of jobs from friends of mine, you know, So how were you making those connections early on? Was the internet part of it, or was it truly like, coffee shop handshake kind of thing?
No, it was, I mean, the internet was definitely a big part of it. Not as much like social media the way it is now. Like, I do think that Instagram and other platforms have become like quite a, almost a calling card or like a, business card in a way. But yeah, at the beginning, I mean, yeah, I got a few projects on Craigslist and Mandy, which was like, they were always a little crazy and whatever. But so I remember I would send like 20 or more emails a day. Like I would just cold call everybody. And if it was like an ad for a small job, I would just ask for a position that was allowing me to learn something new. So I was trying to like, if it's like a freebie job, then I want to be the gaffer at the time, or whatever. Like I want to learn on that production. So I would apply to all these jobs that were maybe a little bit outside of like where I was in terms of my level, but they were small jobs. So it was kind of like, if they need somebody, I'm here. But then, yeah, I mean, that didn't lead to a lot, to be honest. I will say, I got like lucky that I had my friend Mark Rosen, who like I shot his thesis film in school, and he moved to LA after, and he was interning at a production company that was shooting a short film in New York. And the production company was like quite a big commercial company, but they wanted to get into the narrative space, so they were shooting this short. And they like asked, they didn't really have contacts in New York, so they just asked him because he knew he was from the East Coast. They knew he was from the East Coast, and he recommended me and my roommate to be the gaffer and key grip. And we had like absolutely no experience. Like I didn't know how to. I remember we had this more experienced union gaffer was actually married to the writer of the short, and she came on, and her name's Evan Lowe, and she like showed us so much, like how to tie our first knots, how to like bulb a kino flow. We didn't know how to do that, or like HMIs were like terrifying to me at the time. I was like, wait, you turn it on, but then if it dies, you have to wait before you turn it. It makes it awful noise. I was like, I just had no experience because my school had like art kits and stuff like that. Like we didn't have we didn't have HMIs or fluorescents, so I just had no idea how those things worked. And like I remember the DP was this pretty big commercial DP who was like in his 50s, had been a union AC forever, and very experienced guy. And he was very patient with us. But he showed us like, he really liked using Chinese lanterns. So he showed us how to like wire and bolt Chinese lanterns, and we would hide them all over the house. And so, yeah, that was kind of my first job. And at the end of that job, he was like, hey, I'm doing this commercial in New York next week. Do you and William, your roommate, want to like just come work on it? But like, I'll have a gaffer and key grip, but you guys will be like, whatever, my crew for the day. And so basically like grip and electric interns. Right. And, we're like, yeah, of course. And we showed up, and when we showed up, it was like this pretty big Revlon commercial. I think Olivia Wilde was in it. Or I know she was in it. And the gaffer and something happened with the crew, and they weren't there. Like the whole Genie team, like did not get hired on the job. So me and William were there, and he's like, hey, I know this is outside of your like comfort zone, but like, I need you to do this job. We don't have anybody here to like this thing. And that was kind of like getting thrown into the deep end, right? Like I don't know, we had like a 20K and like 6 10Ks, a couple of 5K. It was a crazy like beauty fashion spot. And we had all these lighting units. I had like no idea. I had to like ask the house how to plug things in, because I was like, I don't want to like, A, it's dangerous, and B, I don't want to like blow something in the house or whatever. And yeah, it was intense, but I think stepping up in that scenario allowed gave me some confidence that like, I was basically like, oh, I can do this. I just need to like, you know, I gotta figure it out. But like, once I figure it out, I can pull it off. And yeah, it was like a crazy, oh man, I don't know. It was like 21 hours or something. We did 2 days. Yeah, it was really nuts. And like the power did shut down at some point because of something stupid I did. Like I swapped 2 cables that shouldn't have been swapped or something. And we had to like talk to the stage to run power from one of their other stages. It was like a nightmare. But at the same time, like everybody was like, man, we can't believe that you guys like stepped up and did this as a 2-man crew. Like there was nobody else there with us, you know? So yeah, that was like a big first step. And then that DP hired us for pretty much every commercial he did in New York from then on. So we worked pretty steady with him for like a year. But at the same time, I had met Danny April on like a short film up in a Columbia grad film that was shot up in Vermont because some people that I went to school with were like crewing on it. And they were like, oh, we know somebody in New York who does Genie and would like to come up and help out or whatever. And that's where I got introduced to him, and we started doing a lot of features together after that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what you're saying especially speaks to the value of like never turning a gig down. Because I could imagine it'd be very easy to be like, oh, they bailed? Well, no. Yeah, or I guess not in that exact scenario, but, you know, if you get lowballed pretty hard, you know, your day rate's whatever, I'm making this number up. Your day rate's $600 and someone offers you $100. Very easy to say no, but you never know when you're going to meet some director who like is also doing the gig as a favor, but is normally way higher and could bring you up.
No, totally. And I should say that like we didn't make any money on either of those jobs, but they started like, you know, that DP because we were coming on as interns originally. So theoretically they probably should have paid us once we bumped up to Gaffer and Key Grip, but we were kind of like, yeah, we're down, like whatever. So yeah, we didn't make any money on those, but then kind of from then on, you know, we started making money on them, which was kind of, so it was good. A lot of people might just be like, well, if I'm not making money, I'm not doing it. And I think like, I do think that everybody should get paid appropriately. And I don't really advocate for unpaid interns, but I also think like if you see yourself getting something out of the job and you're not doing something else, then why not do it? You know? And the same thing goes with favors, you know, like I still do like free favor jobs for people that I want to work with or that I'm friends with, you know? So
totally.
Yeah. I don't know. All that stuff can pay back, you know, pay itself back.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought of a lot of my, work as being kind of on the barter system. You know, I'll do friends gigs, but also like, you know, if, some high-end cocktail company wants me to shoot, but they don't have a huge budget, I'll be like, all right, well, you can pay me what you can afford. And then next time I come in, like, I want some free cocktails. They're like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do this, you know?
Sure.
So I'm getting the sense that you kind of approach everything with sort of a workman-like attitude. What do you think, where do you attribute that to? Because sometimes that's something people have to learn, how to like kind of put their nose to the grindstone, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't really know. I mean, for me, I think it started with just, I don't know. I don't think it necessarily has to do with like, I didn't grow up with a ton of money, and I worked all through college and high school. So I definitely like have always worked. So that wasn't like, yeah, I guess that part is definitely something that was my upbringing. It was just like, I worked all year when I was in high school, and I worked when I was in college. But I think really aside from that, it's actually more, especially early on, like I'm obviously a lot more picky now, but early on, I just really was passionate about being on set. And like, for me, that was at the time, especially, it was like all I cared about. So for me, it was like, it didn't really matter. Sure, I wanted to make money as well and make sure I could support things, pay my bills and whatever. and there was plenty of not paying my bills when I first moved to New York. But like, you know, I don't know. I just wanted to work and learn, and I loved film, so that was enough to motivate me to keep pushing. You know.
Sure. I do want to get to Bruiser because it's quite good. Did you shoot the short? I wasn't able to watch the short, but I guess the short went to Sundance. Did you shoot that?
Yeah. So I shot the short, and I also shot Miles's first short, Huntress, a few years before that, maybe 2 or 3 years before that. And yeah, I kind of stumbled into that because a friend of mine was going to shoot his first short, Huntress, and then couldn't do it and backed out and recommended me. And I kind of immediately, like, with Miles, I just kind of immediately realized we had a lot of the same tastes in film, and we were excited about the same kind of photography and wanted to tell the same sort of stories, you know. Like, I've always been driven by character dramas and you know, like, both and like dark character dramas that really like dig into the human condition and human emotion, and might be stylized but are also very like personal and real and connected to whoever they're telling the story about. And when we were setting up for Bruiser the short, I remember, I mean, I was like, happened to be like crazy busy, and like, thankfully Miles pushed the short film, which for me, which I'm super grateful for, because we just wanted to keep working together, but it came up kind of quick and I wasn't available. So luckily they pushed back a couple of months and we were able to pull it off. And we ended up shooting like a month before the pandemic hit, maybe less.
Plenty of post.
So it's a good thing we didn't push any further. He didn't push any further. But yeah, it was definitely like, it was right before, which was kind of crazy. And yeah, they focused on the edit for a while after that. And it was at the next Sundance. So they focused on the edit, and then they delivered, or they applied to Sundance in like whatever September, whenever you apply, like that year. So, which for a short, that's plenty of time, right? From January to, but yeah, the short we shot on 35 millimeter, and we shot 4:3 as well for the short, which was always like a goal. Or it was always how we saw the film, right? It was always 4:3. And we shot his first film on 16, but we were like, I don't know, 4:3 on 16. Like, we really wanted these like portraits that feel like almost like, you know, like Hasselblad, like 6x6 old film portraits. And we wanted the 4:3 frame. The whole goal was to really isolate each character into a box, basically. Like, we didn't even want to shoot two characters in the same frame when we were shooting the short, because it's not as nuanced in the film. So there's a lot more of like a direct separation between the father and son. So we wanted to really isolate them into their own boxes. So that was kind of why we shot 4:3. And 35 was kind of like, it wasn't really doable on our budget. I like pitched in some of my own money, and we went for it. For the short. The feature we shot digital, really by necessity. Like, we would have loved to shoot it on 35, but it just wasn't possible. And we talked about it for a while. There was a lot of like, it was possible for a minute, but then, you know, between COVID, like, spiked back up, and we had to push, and a number of things happened, and it was like, yeah, we were grateful we even were making the movie. So we were like, it's not worth taking the risk of like spending a good portion of our budget on 35, totally. Which was, you know, heartbreaking, but also, I think the short on it. I think, yeah. And I think the movie is still great without it. And I always told Miles, I was like, he'd never even shot digitally because his two shorts were both film. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be different, but like, we're still going to make a great movie, whether it's digital or film, you know? And, so yeah, we both like were a bit bummed about it, but it made sense with what we had, and it's better to work within your means and favor what's going to be best for the story than to try to push for something that may cripple you, in another element of the film. So,
yeah, it took me, I wrote it down, 10 minutes to notice it was in 4:3.
That's good. That's good.
Exactly I can't remember what shot it was. I think it was like an outdoor shot, so it was like very apparent that there was bars on the side, and then I went, wait a minute, hold on, is this a screener I got, or is this
right?
And then after a while I noticed the compositions, and I was like,
really
no, that's for just four.
I think that's a good thing, because I don't think the format should really call attention to itself. So for me, I'm okay with that. It should be more something you feel than something that hopefully no one's distracted by, whether you shoot one format or the other. Same thing happens when I watch films that, shoot 2-to-1, because I feel like it's only recently become a common format. I'm like, oh, this is 2-to-1. That's interesting. Or like, some films shoot or some films shoot like extra widescreen, like 2.6-to-1 or something. And I don't know. I hope that when you watch a film, it's not something that draws your attention, but it's just the composition's fully in. Right?
Well, I mean, the only reason I even noticed was because I was watching it, taking notes on the cinematography, and
right.
But even even with that eye open, I still missed it for the first 10 minutes. It's very nice. I did want to ask, before we get into the lighting, because I think the lighting is really excellent. The whole film, I'll just package all of this into one. No, I won't. I'm going to start with this question. I wanted to know what lenses you were using, because especially you've done the classic DP trick of having some nice lights in the background that go real nice in the bokeh.
Sure.
And it looked like you were shooting wide open a lot of the time. And there's a really nice halation and kind of glow to a lot of the film. And I was wondering how much of that was maybe in post, how much of that was the lens, or if there was any filtration used.
Yeah.
Because my guess was vintage lenses, no filtration.
So we ended up, basically the goal was to make it as close to how we perceive we would have done the film on 35. Like, we really wanted to try to emulate what we would have been able to create to a certain extent. Miles was also like, we should own this and do it as something new, but we were also like, well, how do we like dirty up the image? And we wanted to really make the, kind of push the digital sensor to its limits a bit. So I'll say the first thing, we ended up doing a bunch of camera tests, and we ended up shooting the whole film at 3200 ISO on, we shot on the Alexa Mini. And that was kind of a choice because I know, Drew Daniels. Yeah, and I knew that Drew Daniels did it on Waves, and I knew of a couple DPs doing it. So I was like, I started texting people and messaging people and be like, hey, like, what was your experience with this, and was it okay? And and when I did a test, I was like, I looked at all the different ISOs side by side, and there was like a softness to the 3200, and it wasn't like a noise thing. Like, the image just actually got softer, and I was like, that's really interesting. And we ended up really loving that. Like, it kind of took the edge off for us. Yeah. So I'd say that was like the first thing in terms of trying to the little bit of softness you might feel. We also are, for the most part, I worked with the DIT to overexpose a little bit just to protect it. So even though we were doing 3200, I still probably overexposed by like half a stop or so for the whole film.
And the Alexa can do that, no problem.
Yeah. Well, especially at 3200, you have so much highlight range that it's like that. So that was the other reason, is we're like, we have all these day exteriors, and we just want, we're like, the thing you always love about film is the highlights are just, they're, I don't think they're beaten. Even when they blow out, they look good. Right. So, that was another goal for us, was to like, we're like, by shooting 3200, you're shifting your middle point. So you get all this highlight range. Right. Which is risky on your shadow side, but as long as that's what the half stop overexposure kind of protected for, so that I didn't do anything too dark to where we couldn't get it back. But yeah, so that was the first thing we shot. We shot Panavision, which I have a really great relationship with them.
Interesting.
Mark. Yeah, so we shot Panavision ultra speeds. So we shot their older spherical lenses, which are like probably my favorite spherical lenses. I think they're really beautiful. And if I could own a set, I would. But I love them so much. But
you don't have a Bugatti's worth of lens money just sitting around.
yeah. Well, I mean, you can't even, if there was a comparable, I would buy whatever. You can't even buy Panavision, right? So it doesn't matter. But I love working with them, so it's fine either way. But yeah, so I've worked with Marnie out of Panavision, New York for years, and she connected me with this guy, Steve Cool out of New Orleans, because we were shooting in Alabama, and he helped us out a lot and set up the camera test and allowed us to test some different lenses. And I wasn't sure if we were going to go with the ultra speeds or if we were going to try and use Panavision also detunes their lenses, so you can ask them to soften or add flare, like less flare protection, so you get more flares. And so I was like, maybe we'll shoot on their sharper lenses, but detune them so that they're softer, just so that they're more consistent, because the old lenses aren't always consistent. But there's just some magic to that set of ultra speeds that you can't detune any lens to make it look like that. So I love them. So we shot on those, and then I did use filtration, which we used on the short as well. We used, I believe, quarter black pearlescent for everything.
There you go.
Yeah, I often bounce between an eighth and a quarter with the black pearlescent. I did a test a while back, and for me, that filter is like, I don't love filtration, and for the longest time, I didn't shoot with any of it. But something about that filter is the closest for me to mimicking film halation, which I always think is one of the big things that digital doesn't have. Like, it doesn't have that burn around the highlight, a high contrast area. And there are like ways in post to create it now, but the filtration just helps push it in that direction a little further. And then on the post side, so there was a bit in post. We worked with Sean Dunkley at Assembly. It was our colorist. And he told me, because we started setting the look in advance and before we got in there in person, and he told me woke up, because we told him we wanted halation. I know there are digital ways to do it, so we were trying to figure out how to do it. And he told me he had this fever dream and woke up at 3 a.m. and he's like, I have this idea where I convert the image and into linear and then back. And I didn't know. He lost me at that point, but I was like, okay, I'm excited. I can't wait to see it or whatever.
Actually, what's funny is that's how I do it.
Yeah. Is it?
Convert to linear, highlight the highlights, convert it back. You do a sharpening thing, and then you get halation.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but either way, whatever he did, we just were in love with it. And I was like, wow, this is better than I expected. And it was cool because in the grade, we'd even choose, there are scenes at the houseboat where we chose to actually brighten the highlights. Normally, I feel like in digital, you're always bringing everything down, right? And we chose to brighten them to the point where the halation showed, because we're like, man, that feels like film. It's like something's blowing out that you're not expecting to blow out, and it has this little glow on it that we really liked. It felt like, it just felt like it added that extra bit of texture and life that we were looking for, so that was super exciting. But yeah, those were kind of I would say the steps that kind of messed up and kind of added texture and softness to the image for us. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It's what I was going to say earlier was, you've kind of really nailed the Gordon Willis, simple, but not simplistic thing with this film. Everything is,
I'll take that.
Yeah. Every shot is very classic, but not, I don't want to say derivative, because that might insult somebody else, but it's its own look, but it's a classic look, and it's beautiful and it's very cinematic, and especially the lighting I really wanted to get into because it feels very one light, you know, one's like it looks. This is the mark of any good DP is it looks very simple. It looks like you just sat everyone in the scene and then turned on maybe one or two lights and we're like, all right, let's go. You know, especially dude's car sales office. You know, you've got those two perfect windows to work with. Make everything.
Those were, man, that was harder than you'd think actually, because those windows had a green tint on them. So they're very like tinted and, that was like very frustrating because like getting the lights to feel neutral was very hard. But it is funny because like you look at that location and you're like, oh wow, you have all this like beautiful soft daylight to work with. But yeah, I remember that was like actually a really frustrating location. But because also it was there was also Reflection City, like there were reflections everywhere.
Oh, sure.
And Malcolm's character, Shamir, was wearing glasses the whole time too. So I had to be cognizant of that and aware of that. But I will say, I don't know. I mean, I will say the simplicity is good, but often simplicity ends up being, it's almost harder to make simplicity feel polished, if that makes sense. Like a lot of times it requires, you know, bigger sources. I will say that setup itself wasn't that complicated. It was, I think it was it was an M90 and it was 4K and 9K HMI into like a 12 by, and then we had two 12 light maxi tungsten lights bringing in the warm sunlight. So it was again that blue warm daylight that I like so much.
So you're saying that you would both of those would be the key light, or the cool side would be the shadow side?
No, both were kind of on the key side. So if I remember correctly, it was basically like the bounce with the HMIs, which was cooler, was sort of our wrapping source. So it was a little more 3/4 to the actors. And then the two 12 light maxis were kind of right next to that. So almost side B coming in to feel more like direct sun coming in. So they were on the same side, but it was basically that we had a soft key and then we had like raking warm light that was bouncing off the floor and the desk and stuff like that.
Yeah, you know, where did I write this down? Because there's a lot of great night scenes that I kind of want to talk about, but a lot of these conversations that these characters are having happen to be on where they're sitting at tables, and you've just got this very beautiful, you know, you've got the shears and the nice sun, and so was that kind of the setup for all the daytime, even in the houseboat, you know, where you had that little sun setup for those interiors?
I'd say similar for most of the day interiors. It was a pretty similar approach. Like our big units were like the 9K HMI and the 4K HMI. And then we had two 12 light maxis, which were bulbed with narrow spots. So they're very punchy. And we would basically, it was always a combination. If I wanted hard light, which I think most of it we wanted to feel like, without going like, you know, George Washington was a reference, but we didn't want to go that warm, right? Like we wanted to feel like the South without feeling like it was a Southern look or something, you know? So we wanted to feel hot.
Oh, brother, or whatever.
We wanted to feel warm. Yeah, exactly. So the warm daylight was kind of a play, was leaning into that. And sometimes I would, even though those lights are tungsten, I'd gel them with like a quarter or a half blue. Or maybe I'd go the other way and I'd gel the HMIs bluer or whatever. I messed with a few different variants, depending on like if it was a morning scene or a midday or a night. I would change the level of color contrast, or not night, a sunset, you know. The houseboat is tricky because the houseboat, I mean, you've seen the film, so you know, but the houseboat's probably maybe 24 feet off the shore that we were shooting at. I think we built a 24-foot, or the art department built a 24-foot dock for that. And so getting the light to get to the boat was very tricky.
Sure.
So instead of balancing the HMIs, I think we went through like heavy diffusion instead to try to throw it further. And the tungsten lights carried the distance because they had the narrow spots. But yeah, that was tricky. I mean, the shore was like kind of lined with lights and diffusion. It was very muddy and messy, so it was very hard to like set everything up there. But yeah, I'd say like generally speaking, we were fairly consistent with that method for daylight. And then, yeah, depending on time of day, we change the level of color contrast.
Yeah. And are you the kind of guy who leaves the camera like, you know, at 32 or 56, or are you constantly playing with that white balance and trying to art direct that color contrast a little bit?
I wouldn't say I don't just stick to 32 or 5600, but I don't like bounce around a ton. I usually will end up finding something I like for like night interiors. Like I usually like night interiors to be a little bit warmer and let the practicals actually play as warm. So I'll usually balance around like 3800 or 4000. And then midday, I usually balance around 4500 to 5000 when you're inside, if I'm using warm lights, like I'm using tungsten lights. And then exteriors for this film, we balanced warmer. I think we were at like 6500 for exteriors. Just because, again, we wanted it to feel a little warmer, and we didn't want it to feel like a cold film. Like it felt like it should feel warm.
Sure. Yeah. You know, you mentioned the night scenes, and there's a couple. I haven't seen this a lot recently in film, and I'm kind of like was stoked that you did it. There's a scene in a kitchen at night with overheads that are like cyan, and I was wondering, is that like cyan 60 or what was that situation? Because the fair setup feels similarly cyan.
Yeah, so I think they were actually matched color wise. We might have balanced the camera differently, but I think the lights were balanced the same. Yeah, a lot of times when I want like a really green fluorescent that's like feels like a blue-green fluorescent, almost like I think there's a scene in the game where there's all these fluorescents overhead that are like blue-green. Yeah, if I want like that feel, I usually go like either somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 Kelvin on like LEDs. And then I'll
so those
go,
are LED bulbs.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then we'll go full or double plus green. So, and sometimes LEDs don't do that, so you might have to. We'll maybe put those as gels on, but we'll balance the color temperature of the bulbs. And then sometimes I think on this film, we had enough LEDs that we kind of just did it with those. Sometimes I'll also use like, I don't think we use HMIs for any night scenes. That's not true. So when we use an HMI, then I'm also adding like half blue and either full or double for full green. I think on this film it was full green. So an HMI would do like half or 3/4 blue and full green. And then all the LEDs in the kitchen, we did 10,000, I think, in full green.
And those were the Asteras?
They were, yeah.
They're always the Asteras.
I don't love them. But
single DP.
I don't love them. And they're good in that scenario where you need to, where you're mimicking a fluorescent. They're super useful. I shouldn't say I don't love them. They're like,
they're utility lights. They're not your key.
Well, yeah. And the other thing for me is that the longer and it's not like I'm super far into my career, but the longer I've worked in the industry, especially since I've been a DP, I just want lighting to, it's funny I say this because nobody I work with would probably think I work this way, but I want lighting to be as easy as possible, but still achieve the thing I want it to do. And often the thing I want to do is quite complicated. So it may not appear that I'm doing something simple, but I'm always trying to find the simplest way to do the thing that I want to do. And that's just comes down to like, our schedules are always so tight on film sets that I don't like when I'm the one that's taking a lot of time. Like I want to be efficient and I want to be fast. And like, it just stresses me out. I'm like, I don't want to be stressed about us not being set up yet. Like I want to get the lights up as quick as we can, and I'm not like, and that doesn't come down to like pushing the crew or anything like that. Like, I think I'm pretty reasonable, but it's more just about like, I want to find the easiest tool. And Asteras are so easy because they're just battery powered. They're light, you throw them up or whatever. So from that, I feel like I have to have them on every set now, just because they're so easy. I wouldn't say they're the perfect thing for certain choices, but yeah, they're just convenient, and a lot of it comes down to convenience.
Yeah, I've found that the Asteras and the little aperture MC magnetic guys.
Yeah, we
you
had
can
a
chuck
couple of
those
those.
under
Yeah.
cabinets or where, like those two together, like give you enough utility that like there's just not enough. You just put it over there,
Totally. Yeah, we definitely do. And it's funny. I used to do a similar thing when I worked as a gaffer before all this LED stuff existed. I think there was like 1x1 panels and stuff back then, but I would always like have a bunch of sockets, like porcelain sockets, and I would put different photo floods or different bulbs in them, wrap them in cinefoil, black wrap, and I would just like throw them into corners of each room and just dim them up a little bit. So like, it's funny that the evolution of that has become Asteras and whatever else. But yeah, back in the day, I remember just like, it looked so DIY and janky, but I would just throw bulbs all over the place,
Yeah. Well, and now that everyone's seen that fucking Roger Deakins does that with a little aluminum hoop, I think that gives everyone permission to, get creative with their DIY lighting situations,
Totally. I mean, I sort of came up reading his like forum and all that stuff back in the day, and CML and all those websites.
RIP.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I grew up, I came up like building covered wagons and batten strips and using a bunch of Chinese lanterns and all kinds of stuff like that. So I still appreciate that stuff. I rarely end up building like batten strips anymore, but I use Chinese lanterns a lot still. And I'll use paper lanterns. I'll use like the like China hats or whatever. I'll use, I mean, I still like using tungsten dados. Like, I don't know. I do like some of those older tools still,
and they're cost effective.
They are. Yeah, they are. Like, I think like Carroll, Ed Lockman's awesome. I just love his work so much. And like similar, like school, like Robbie Mueller, like I just love those cinematographers. And yeah, when I saw like Carroll was like almost all like tungsten Lecos and paper lanterns, I was like, man, this is awesome. I love that. That's how this movie was lit, because I think it's really beautiful and it's so simple. It's just. And I actually, this movie I'm about to start, I just messaged Gaffer and I was like, we need to get a bunch of paper lanterns and gem balls. And like, I want to be able to just tape lights up, and like make it simple, but still those lights are so beautiful and soft. They're great. So, and I didn't do that actually on Bruiser. I think we mostly used LEDs. We didn't use any paper lanterns. We used tungsten as far as the big units. So we had like, those maxi brutes. And we had tungsten small lights. We had like 650s and tweenies and inkies and stuff like that. But yeah, I didn't use a lot of like the smaller, like practical bulb stuff,
Yeah. How much neg were you using?
Not a lot, actually.
Oh, really? Because I actually have a note here. I was like, this guy's just putting walls of neg up.
It's funny. I
guess if your exposure's high enough, it does it itself.
That's what I was going to say. I actually don't use negative that much, and a lot of people do. I use it sometimes, but I often, because I use color a lot, and because I feel like I'm usually keying someone with something that is like more focused and deliberate, that I don't honestly always feel like I need it. If I'm in like a white house, like, yeah, I'll use it, and I'll even do the ceiling and the wall. But it really depends on the environment. Like, Yeah, I didn't really use. I didn't. We had it in a couple scenes. Like we used it a little bit. Man, really not much, to be honest. When
Honestly,
I think about it.
that's kind of rad to hear because yeah, like I would say the vast majority, 90% of the DPs I've interviewed are all like, yeah, neg is the future.
Yeah, I know. I
So it's
know.
fun
It's
to hear.
funny.
It's fun to hear a separate take where and still achieving the same effect.
Well, and I don't think I want to take anything away from that. It is probably in some ways, it's probably simpler because sometimes it's really hard to like focus the light enough to where it's not blowing up your whole set, right? Um, so yeah, I guess I could see. I use it when it is useful, but I don't always feel like it is. So
Well,
yeah,
and I also think another issue is like I was saying, like because you're using HMIs and like maxi brutes and stuff, which a lot of people, especially on smaller films, are just sticking to sky panels and stuff. So I think
right,
you need that neg there to build that contrast. Whereas when you have a
right,
traditional tungsten or HMI unit, you've got enough power that the camera naturally gives you that contrast, or the
right.
light does.
I think
But you
that's
know what I
right.
mean.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's definitely part of it. And you're using, again, it's more focused. If I'm using a big source, if I'm using a big source through a window and it's a mix of hard and soft, like the hard light is kind of focused enough that you're kind of, even if it's going through a shear or whatever, that you're still, yeah, the fall off still feels very fast. But yeah, I think it's partially that. I think I also, like I said, I probably overuse mixed color temperatures. And in some ways, you add more contrast by doing that, right? Like color contrast is perceived contrast. So I think some of it is also that, in that if I have a warm key, I might have a cooler fill. And I think that's automatically building in extra contrast into your image. Um, yeah, I mean, I will say a big part of it too is that like it depends on locations and art department. Like, um, our art department team was incredible in this film, and production designer was April Lasky, and I worked with her all through prep. Me, her, and Miles would work on like we'd look at all the wall colors and like what it was just like it was a great process because it's very collaborative and like Miles would always make fun of us because we'd get down these like rabbit holes, me and her, like figuring out the best, like color green for a wall to be
Sure.
or the right wallpaper or whatever. But that's a big part of it too, because when you have darker toned walls, and I like brought this up when we were talking about production design. I was like, when you're lighting darker skin tone, for me, it's very hard in a brighter set, right? Because you automatically have an extreme contrast, right? So for me, I was like, if I want to be able to craft the lighting, I need the sets to be darker because then I can push more light in and I can push more light in on our actors without the whole set feeling bright. So that was a big discussion, I think, is that I was just like, I can make a set feel bright. Like, I think there's like the birthday party scene when they have a bunch of people in the house feels fairly bright, but I couldn't have done that if it wouldn't have worked to light it that way if the set had bright walls, right?
Right.
So it almost allows me to it allows you more creative control, especially again with darker skin tone, because there's just such a separation between if it's a white wall and someone with dark skin. I mean, I would even say someone with like mid-tone skin, someone with like a tan person on against a white wall. It's like, it's so hard to make the lighting look shaped on them. So that was a big part, was just discussing production design. And because nobody wanted the film to feel too dark. So there was like, oh, maybe we should use light, like summer colors inside. And I was just like, that's going to hurt my ability to light it bright. Like I can't make the scene bright if the walls are the brightest thing in the frame. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I got to interview the production designer from Power the Dog and Ozark, and through those conversations, it's like for the longest time I was like the colorist is the right hand person of the DP, but it truly is the production designer.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, we work directly hand in hand. Like, At least I like to. It kind of depends on the production designer and how they like to work. But yeah, I always think that should be the most collaborative relationship I have, other than with the director, you know? Cause yeah, the colorist is incredibly important. But again, that's all after you've created the image, and then you're honing it in, right? You're hopefully honing in what you creatively decided ahead of time. And not to say like colorists bring creative input like a lot to the table as well, but I think there's something like you need to be able to create that first. You need a foundation, right? So yeah, for me, I mean, it's definitely director and production designer are huge. And then obviously like, I mean, the whole team's important, but in terms of prep, that part is really important.
Totally. Was there a particular setup that you are extra proud of for some reason?
Yeah, I mean, I was most scared about the big field scene at the end, which like I don't want to give away what happens, but
right.
That was definitely the scariest for me, because like the creative idea came from Miles, and Miles was like, I want the actors to feel like they're under a spotlight, and we lose them in and out of light and dark, and they fall out of the light and back into the light. And it was like, so I almost want like this very dramatic pool of light that falls off quickly. Right. So while leading up to the film, I was trying to think of like best ways to do that. And we kind of thought it would be the most interesting to have this scene takes place in a field alongside of the road, right? And there's a single street light. And that was kind of always part of it, is we're like, okay, well, what if it's like at a crossroads or at a piece where there's just one light that's like a street light that's, you know, semi DIY. We were trying to justify why it would be there, but like in our mind, It's like someone's farm or something is there, and we wanted this one light. So that
I grew up kind of in the sticks, and there's plenty of roads with no street lights. You know, you'll get one, you know, so
totally.
Fully justified.
Yeah, totally. We were, well, yeah, it was like a whole conversation, but because there wasn't a road with just one street light, like that wasn't doable. So actually the production designer and our director and the whole team, like they worked with the town to install that pole. Like they found a street pole somewhere and had that installed and cemented into the ground. Yeah. And then and then separately they found an old sodium vapor light that they could rig, you know, that the key grip could like fix and the gaffer could wire. So that was all set up. It wasn't there.
That's pretty cool.
And yeah, hold on one second. Sorry, my throat's been kind of dry.
No worries.
And yeah, that scene was always made me really nervous, because I was like, you know, I assumed we'd probably need some kind of a lift to put a light out above the street light, which we didn't really have the money for, but I like convinced everybody that it was worth it. Right. And you know, and then I was trying to think of the best way to make this like cool light that almost had a hard fall off, so that you just would go to black immediately. And I thought maybe it would be interesting to have like a parkan array. So like, again, working with kind of old tools, but we took I think 9 or 12 1K parkans, and we rigged them into a softbox that was 12 by 12 softbox. And I wanted to go with a half soft frost originally, because I was like, I want the light to be hard but soft at the same time. Like I want the fall off to be quick. I want it to be punchy, but I also don't want it to be like hard bags under people's eyes and hard shadows. So
right.
That was sort of our starting point. I was like, okay, well, let's do a bunch of parkans with spot bulbs in them. And then maybe we do like a 6-foot skirt underneath it. So it's this very like hard shadow. And we set it up, and it was a little too harsh at first. So basically I could see every individual spot, because it was going through a half soft frost. So when we lifted it off the ground, all of a sudden I could see like where the separation of the units were, and that didn't feel right. Obviously, we wanted this one source. So then I ended up basically just doubling the diffusion, and we realized we could play with the amount, how quick it falls off by lowering the box closer. So a lot of the close-ups, we would bring the box down closer to the talent, and then it would fall off faster. And some of that was practical too. Like it was so windy, and like to the point where we almost couldn't put the box up at all, safety wise. So we were basically like, we'd put it up and we'd shoot the wide, and then we'd bring it down, and then we'd be like, okay, let's, the wind slow. We had like a wind meter on the lift to make sure everything was safe. We'd be like, okay, it's slowed down to safe levels. We'd put it back up and we'd be like, okay, we'll shoot the next shot. And like, we literally, like for the full 2 nights we spent on that scene, we would bring the box up, bring it down, and like, so it was like, it was very challenging. So yeah, I mean, that was definitely the hardest scene and the biggest scene that I'm definitely very proud with the result.
It's a very almost dreamlike. It's very beautiful. It's like again, it's simple, but it's a very beautiful final scene. You know, it even with no dialogue. That's not giving anything away. With no dialogue, it speaks volumes.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when we were shot listing, we're like, if at any point in the film we're going to get impressionistic, like this is the one to really push it, So again, I don't want to give anything away, but we pushed what we thought was like realistic in that scene because we really wanted to heighten that and make that feel just impressionistic. And yeah, I think dreamlike is appropriate. Like it should feel honest and real, but again, heightened. And that was always the goal. There are definitely some other points in the film where we pushed that a little bit. Like there's a scene where Malcolm's like walking through the house at night and he's alone and he's a little bit like on edge. Like I feel like we pushed the like surrealness or whatever of that a bit, the surrealism of the lighting in that. So there are times where we did that, but really like we were like, this is the scene where like we want everything to feel grounded, but here we should push a bit. Totally.
Yeah. It's like I said, it looks great. We're a little over time, so I'm gonna have to let you go. But I like to wrap up the conversation with, well, the same 2 questions has changed a bunch, but we'll ask you today the same 2 questions, and they are: if you were to book your own double feature of Bruiser and another film, what would you want that other film to be?
Interesting. You mean like to go watch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can either, Bruiser can be first or second, and the other film doesn't have to be complementary. It can be contrasting. It can be an allegory. Whatever you think would be interesting.
Yeah, man, that's a good question. Hold on a second. Let me take a look at my notes because I want to look at some of the films we referenced because I think they'd be good to watch. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too because it's like, what would I be in the mood for to watch back to back too? Because sometimes with a back to back movie, you don't necessarily want something that's very similar, right?
Right.
Yeah, I would say. I don't know. I'd maybe
do
say
a couple. It's
I mean,
this is a fantasy situation.
I know. It's funny because I feel like when I'm going in for a movie like this, I also like to just keep in that sort of headspace.
Sure.
I mean, I will just say that like Cold War was a huge reference for us. The Place Beyond the Pines. Ali Fear Eats the Soul was a big reference. George Washington. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd honestly, I'd watch any of those back to back. And I would also, you know, watch something completely different. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
When I asked,
I guess that's what I got.
I've mentioned this a handful of times, but just because it was the funniest answer. But when I interviewed Jeff Cronenweth about being the Ricardos, he said Alien versus Predator.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's awesome. You know, it's a good movie that I just watched 2 nights ago that I don't know. I feel like shouting it. Not shouting it out, but I feel like shouting it out because it doesn't have a great Rotten Tomatoes list. Like, I was like, what? This is what this film's rated?
Rotten Tomatoes.
Do you, I know, whatever. It doesn't have to be Rotten Tomatoes. But anyway, it didn't have great reviews, but me and the director on this movie I'm working on now watched We Own the Night. I don't know if you're a James Gray fan, but I was like, man, this movie is fantastic. Why don't enough people?
It's on my list for sure.
Movie? It's worth watching. I thought it was really good. I was like, this is an underappreciated film. But you could probably say that sadly about a lot of James Gray's movies. I don't know. I think he's really, really smart and incredible filmmaker. So I was like, yeah, I don't know, whatever. That's just a random thing. And I was like, it's been eating at me a little bit the last couple of days.
For sure.
Well, I know more people like this movie. It's really good. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good like side by side, but those are some of the movies we referenced. I would say I'd watch any of them. I love Cold War. I would put that movie. I'd watch that next to anything else. That movie is really, really incredible. And it was obviously a good 4-3 reference for us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Second question, and love this one. The guys who made Looking for Erdnase accidentally turned me onto this question. So many people ask, what's the best piece of advice you got? And I think that's bullshit because there's so many good teachers out there. What's the worst piece of advice you got?
Oh, man. That's funny. What is the worst piece of advice? I mean...
Or one of, I should say.
Yeah. It's funny because I can't even say like fake it till you make it because that like definitely has like happened in my career.
That has its utility.
So yeah, I think it's like, it's kind of shitty because you don't want to like, you can only really fake it till you make it if you can actually step up and do the job. Because I think that's kind of like, it's shitty to just tell someone fake it till you make it. But then if they can't do the job, they're kind of like not achieving for that production or whatever. So I do think that's kind of a bad piece of advice, but I would just alter it to say like, fake it within your ability, like know your limits a little bit, you know.
Be confident.
Yeah, be confident. Yeah, it's true. I mean, honestly, I think like I said, taking risks is like the most important, I think, piece of advice. But you got to be responsible as well. It's like taking risks within the level of responsibility.
Yeah. Well, thanks for giving me your time today, man. That was a really awesome conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, these things always make me very nervous. I don't do a lot of them, but it was great talking to you. It was really, it felt like a great conversation.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F@R Matbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.